Fishing for Fantasy.
So in week 1, it is very easy to react and overreact to different players' performances in this week. You have some players that might have dropped near 20 points who will never, ever do that again. You might have some players who dropped a donut, Brandon Ayuk, who you might be saying, how did that happen? So we're going to be talking today about some of the trash and or treasure that you can potentially fish out of the fantasy pool. First up, I'm going to be talking about Jameis Winston. Now, this was actually someone who I had picked up as a second quarterback deep in the draft because I figured Jameis Winston, while he was kind of problematic on the Buccaneers due to the fact that he loves throwing to defenders, that's a big habit of his. But with a combination of his eye surgery and being an understudy to Drew Brees, he is looking kind of sharp. He was looking kind of sharp last year, and he beat out not that it's really that big of a deal, but he beat out Hill for the starting job. I think Winston has a lot of upside on a Saints offense that I see putting a lot of points on the board, especially with an incredibly strong defense that will be getting them favorable field position, as we saw quite a bit of on this weekend. So I suspect Jameis Winston will be getting quite a bit of touchdowns. My only concern is that Alvin Kamara also has a propensity to drop 5 or 6 touchdowns a game rushing, so that could take away from a little bit of his workload. But I think if Jameis Winston is not picked up in your league and he is only on 26% of rosters, he would be an excellent backup quarterback because he will explode some weeks. And when he played for the Buccaneers, he had some 400, 500-yard games.
For sure, and I certify that opinion as well. As I said earlier, I am a Winston stan. I am a Winston truther. I praise at the altar of Jameis Winston. So that's where it's at, baby. My quarterback that I'm going to be going with this week, so I'm going to go with Jared Goff. Funny, because I'm not a big Goff fan. I don't really like Jared Goff. I didn't really like him coming out of the draft. Thought he was an interesting evaluation, was kind of confused why he went first overall, but also Carson Wentz went second overall. Just kind of goes to show the talent that was available that year, at least consensus opinions at least. But the reason why I'm saying Goff, the reason why I think that Goff could be a good and interesting addition for most teams, he's free. He's on 5.6% of all standard rosters for one quarterback leagues. I mean, he's going to have so much garbage time. The Lions had made it a game, this past weekend, but honestly, it's only because they were down 3 touchdowns at one point. They had the opportunity to do what the Jaguars did when they had Blake Bortles. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Jared Goff is worse than Blake Bortles. I think he's probably a better quarterback than Blake Bortles ever was. But there was also a year where Blake Bortles was a top 10 fantasy quarterback, and it's because they were getting blown out every single game. So I'm less focusing here on what I expect out of Goff when it comes to production from efficiency standpoints and more from a volume standpoint. He threw 57 passes this week. I 1,000% expect that to happen again. It was near the career high for the amount of attempts he had in a single game. I expect him to reach that multiple times this year. 50-plus passes, tons of times, because there's going to be no hope for them because they don't have a good team.
Yeah, and I would like to point out that if you looked at the final score of that game, and if you looked at Goff's numbers and you didn't watch the game, you would have thought that was a much closer game. You would have thought that was a competitive, really tight football game. You would not have known it was a blowout from the start. So the numbers can be deceptive, and in fantasy football, we don't care who wins. We care what your numbers are.
Exactly, and that's why I'm sitting here thinking Jared Goff, good addition for you. And if he goes bad, don't blame me. It's your fault for listening to me.
Up next, we have Eli Mitchell. This has to be, in my opinion, the biggest surprise so far. As far as we knew, I didn't even know this guy was on the 49ers depth chart. He's their 6th rounder, I believe. We knew Mostert was first, and we know he's a little bit of an injury machine, but most experts thought that Sermon was going to be the backup. And then we were kind of surprised when the game started, and he was not active. There were 3 running backs. I believe it was Jermichael Hasty, Eli Mitchell, and Mostert. And post-game, Shanahan says it was because he was beat out by all 3. Now that's interesting because now we have Eli Mitchell as a backup who is effectively starting if Mostert is injured, and he breaks 100 yards. This guy that 1.9% of people have, and I promise you it's got to be close to 0 starting him, drops a 100-yard game. Well, goodbye Dalvin Cook, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to touch on Elijah Mitchell, sounds weird. No, just to kind of reemphasize your point or reiterate what you're saying, not a lot of people were in on Mitchell. The guy that I had previously mentioned before, Ray GQ on Twitter, my favorite evaluator because he's like a film evaluator, he was in on Mitchell. So he took some victory laps on Twitter right after it happened. Not at the expense necessarily of Mostert's injury, but the fact that Mitchell came in and has a very similar profile physically to Raheem Mostert. And so seeing Mitchell take that game day spot over Sermon on like the active list, huge shock. But also, why have we ever trusted Shanahan? Because all he's ever done is lie in the past anyways. About all the guys that he would jump on the table for, the guys that he would have drafted ahead of so-and-so and so-and-so. You know what I mean? He's made a lot of decisions where I'm starting to wonder if Shanahan is honestly purely just an offensive system. You know what I mean? Like, and that's it.
He's not actually a person. He's a robot that's putting a system out.
He's a robot that has the system out there. That's all I can take from it anymore.
Up next, we have Kenneth Gainwell. Now, this is a little bit more of a deeper league pickup, but it's a deep cut. But he is a rookie who had a strong debut, which is usually a good sign. Now, he is not a starter, but he is backing up Miles Sanders, I believe, who I think is coming off of an injury from last year, if I'm correct. So there is some potential upside on him. I don't think he's someone that's going to immediately get you value, but if Sanders deals with any sort of reoccurring injury, or if he continues to show a decent sort of aspect in the passing game, he could get a little bit more play and bring you midseason value. So for your deeper leagues, someone to consider picking up on your bench, possible upside midseason.
Yeah, Kenny G was one of my favorite running back prospects coming out of college last year. He sat the whole season out because of COVID. Ended up being a 5th-round pick. Probably size concerns. He's 5'9", 5'8", 200 pounds, sub 200, like 195.
Us 5'9ers are not good for football.
No. Yeah, but at least he's a good shape of 5'9", as opposed to my 5'9", 225, not in shape. But we got Kenny G, and I think that Gainwell is going to be a force in the future. He catches tons of passes, super efficient on 3rd down, like does everything that you would want out of a running back. So just give him more touches, and he's going to be great. Next up. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that's something that I like a lot is running backs who are featured in the pass game. I believe it's Chase Edmonds from the Cardinals is a great example of this. Last year, he was behind, I believe, Kenyon Drake. And he still got a little bit of fantasy value just because of his value in the passing game. So running backs who demonstrate that they're also capable of catching the ball and producing that way, I tend to like, especially in PPR leagues, because sometimes the running game just isn't working. The fact that if you can also pass block and you can also catch balls, you still have value in a game that's getting out of hand. Unlike a Derrick Henry sort of person who you want to be ahead. You don't really want to be 10 points behind and then have Derrick Henry as your running back because he might not be getting as many touches.
For sure.
So next up, we have the obligatory discussion of the Ravens locker room, primarily because when you have 3 season-ending injuries of your running backs, that's some pretty big openings, especially for a Ravens team that has traditionally been run-first offense. So Tyson Williams, who was picked up, he is in 78% of leagues. If you're in one of those 22%ers, grab this guy. He's going to be a Ravens starting running back. That's usually going to get you some value there just due to the fact that we love running the ball. Latavius Murray is also a potential pickup, 45.5% own him. Depending on how over the hill he is, I mean, he has potential to win out that opening slot over Tyson and being a real threat, especially after he learns the playbook. Super duper, I'm in a 16-person league deep cut. Le'Veon Bell, if you're that absolutely desperate, but let's be honest, he likely is getting 0 points every single game for the rest of this year. I don't think Le'Veon Bell's ever going to be a factor for the Ravens, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think he meant for the rest of his career.
For the rest of his career.
He's not going to be a factor for anyone ever
Most
again.
likely.
That's what I'm thinking.
We'll see. Maybe he's not spent, but that's the deepest of deep cuts.
Yeah, for sure. We'll move on to wide receivers now. I'm going to start with Nelson Aguilar. He's only owned in approximately 30% of leagues, standard 0.5 PPR leagues. And the dude is just efficient. I mean, since leaving the Eagles, he hasn't had issues with drops, not in the way that he did when he was in Philadelphia. And he seems to be like, I don't know, maybe he's just getting better with age, kind of like Brandon Lloyd did back in the day. But I'm thinking that him being with the Patriots is an awesome fit. Mac Jones, not known for his arm strength, but known for his accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the one thing that Nelson Aguilar really needs. Put the ball where it's got to be, but he'll come down with it for the most part unless it's the playoffs. So, he's got an opportunity to really take over, I think, and be like a flex option. Wide receiver 3, if you have deep rosters, if you're sitting on like a 12-man starting league, 100%, he should be on your roster.
Yeah, and I believe he was target leader for Mac Jones. Mac Jones is traditionally a pocket passer. He's not going to be the kind of Lamar Jackson to beat you with his legs. He's going to try to beat you with his arm. PPR leagues, extra advantage. Nelson's only in 30% of teams, so that's a pickup that most people can make in those, especially like you said, in those 12-person leagues. Up next, one of your personal favorites, Christian Kirk. Now, this is a guy that people have been kind of like calling the sleeper for a while now, and I think that now he is in prime position to really open up and make this his year. And I think the primary reason for that is the acquisition of AJ Green. I don't think AJ Green is spent. I think that last year was a really weird off year for him, but people forgot just how talented this dude was. And when you have DeAndre Hopkins, holy crap, and AJ Green next to each other, you're going to be diverting a lot of resources to making sure that Hopkins isn't catching your Hail Marys. So it's a little bit of a struggle there for defenses. And oftentimes you see when you have these superstars that these sneaky guys kind of sneak under. I call it the Cole Beasley syndrome, where you're focusing so much on Stephon Diggs that Cole Beasley just starts tearing you up and gets 12 catches for like 120 yards, and you're like, I can't do anything about this. I have to cover Stephon. I think that's where Kirk has some potential to go this year. Hopkins is going to draw likely cornerback and safety every single play, if we're being honest. He's that good. He's top 3, possibly currently top 1, with Julio Jones being a little bit sketchy over the past year. Kirk is going to have some good matchups.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. And it's funny because I was such an anti-Christian Kirk person up until yesterday, and it's because my buddy Paul, shout out Paul. You'll never listen to this, but if you do, shout out Paul.
We'll send this to him.
Yeah, I'll send it to him. Exactly. He's been telling me so much about Christian Kirk. He loves Christian Kirk. He knows it's gonna happen. He knows it's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, like, Paul got a much deserved victory lap. And honestly, man, I think that Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, that's it. They're the only 2 people in that tier. I think that. Julio, as you brought up, he's older. I don't think he's spent, but I think he's kind of, more so of like the bottom tier of number 1 wideouts. And I think AJ Brown is probably the number 1 wideout in that offense. But I also think, AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, they're these young guys who have to really show themselves first. And they've been good, but I want to continue to see that development. I want to continue to see them dominate because, DeAndre Hopkins is proven to be class in the NFL, and it's really hard to find that.
Yeah, and the Julio situation, very unfortunate, of course, where he was probably unarguably the top until his lingering hamstring issue. But yeah, that has opened up Hopkins and Adams to kind of compete for that who is number 1, who is number 2 conversation. And after week 1, hate to be the Monday morning quarterback coach or couch coach, whatever you want to call it. But it's looking like Hopkins kind of got that one. But we'll see.
For
We
sure.
have a lot of season left to have this debate of who is number one, who is number two. But
Oh, yeah.
Hopkins made a strong case. Up next, we have Sterling Shepard, who surprisingly started getting a little bit more prominence with fantasy last year. He's a sneaky one. He is only held in 25% of leagues, and he has become a target hog for the Giants offense, who apparently still sucks even with Saquon Barkley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in the Giants. I mean, it's not because I'm a Washington fan, but it's because Daniel Jones has more fumbles and interceptions than anybody since 2019, since he got into the league. I mean, dude's a turnover machine. He's just not developing the way that you want him to. The only good thing about that is that they're going to be passing a lot. Sterling Shepard is going to be getting a lot of targets thrown his way. And I know that they just signed Kenny Golladay and everything else. And like you said, they got Saquon. But Shepard was a second-round pick a few years ago for a reason. I think it was 2017 or 2018. For a reason. He was a good player at Oklahoma. He's a good player now. He just really kind of needed to be funneled targets. And I think he's finally at the point where he will. And he's just got to stay healthy.
And on the plus side, when your quarterback trips and gives up free touchdowns, that's more opportunities for you to catch touchdowns as well as more passes in those PPR leagues.
Exactly. Last guy here that I'm going to be talking about before handing Robbie the defense of the week, KJ Osborne. So I get it. Week 1, no need to overreact, especially to a team like the Vikings. But he's a wideout for the Vikings. Owned in 0.1% of leagues, rostered, in 0.1% of leagues. Super deep cut, probably for 14-man leagues, 12-man leagues, with deep rosters, 20 to 23 spots. If anything happens to Thielen, and Thielen, he had some injury issues last year and the year before, or, if Justin Jefferson regresses for any reason, or even if they're throwing 55 passes a game, it's not only going to go to 2 receivers. There's not going to be 25 targets a game going to each guy. At the most of the time, it's going to be 12 to 15. So you have to divvy that up appropriately between Cook and then, their tight ends as well, Conklin and Herndon that they just got from the Jets. But I really think that Osborne's going to have enough targets, have enough of an opportunity to finally make a name for himself. You know what I mean?
I'm actually really glad that you added KJ Osborne to this list because he was someone that I'm working on acquiring in one of my deeper leagues. Mainly for that reason. When you have Thielen and Jefferson drawing a lot of attention, you tend to get these openings, and Kirk Cousins does like to spread the ball out a little bit. So he had a very large week 1. Almost no one has him. I believe he's the 3rd starting wide receiver, right? So when you have these...
he is the number 3.
Yeah, so when you have these 3 wide receiver packages, he's going to be on the field. He's pretty much free in every single league. I completely agree with you. I think that he is a possible big sleeper depending on how things play out with the Vikings.
100%.
The big surprise of the week, if that's an award, it would go to the defense of the Cardinals?
Yeah, weird, right?
You got that right. So the Cardinals, a massive surprise. And again, this is... Week 1, it is very difficult to tell if this is a function of maybe J.J. Watt, just his presence. He didn't have, stats-wise, a game really at all, but maybe his presence kind of garners more attention. I'm not really sure what the deal with that was, but the Cardinals got 6 sacks, and 5 of them were from the same guy. I know we had mentioned that earlier, but that's a lot of sacks to be getting against a team with Derrick Henry. Part of me has to wonder, how are you sending a full pass rush at these guys knowing who's in that backfield? And knowing that if you send that pass rush in there and he gets past you, you might be in a bit of trouble.
Yeah, it's, when you look at the offensive line for Tennessee, there really hasn't been a lot of turnover since last year. And Derrick Henry's coming off a 2,000-yard rushing season. I get it. Run blocking, very different than pass blocking. I was a pretend offensive lineman in high school. I actually played offensive line, but, I was 5'9", 180, and getting demolished by our 6'6", 300-pound offensive tackle who was a recruit for plenty of D1 schools. So not fun. But what I'll say at the end of the day is that that offensive line looked weak, and the offensive line looked rough, and the Cardinals really look like they have it together. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's finally it's taken forever for that defense to put itself together and to be good. But I mean, they've been spending a lot of draft capital on defense. They've been
Yeah.
getting guys like Isaiah Simmons and acquiring guys like Chandler Jones a couple years ago to try and to do what they can. And like you said, JJ Watt makes an impact just having him there.
Yeah.
It's the Jadeveon Clowney effect, where sometimes you're not actually going to see the full stat, but you'll 100% see what it is that he's able to do.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think the last time that I saw the Cardinals defense look this ferocious was the year, I think it was the year where they went 11-5 but didn't make the playoffs. This was, I think, like 5, maybe 6 years ago, back when they had the Honey Badger on their team, and kind of saw some shades of that. That was Now, with defenses, it's always hard to tell. I remember last year, the Colts defense, they were by no means the number one defense, but they had a couple insane. I think they were the number one defense in fantasy last year for overall points. So it can be really hard to judge defenses, but you're looking not necessarily for those that are going to shut down offenses, but you're really looking for the big playmakers. And defensive lines tend to be the people that force those big money plays, those interception returns for touchdowns. Cardinals showing 6 sacks in week 1. That's pretty cool. So we'll see if that keeps going. Defense. Maybe it's a fluke. Hard to tell.
Considering flukes, my friend, let's talk about some fool's gold here.
Yes.
Let's think about who isn't a great option to pick up despite having a good week.
So I got 2 people here that I'm considering fool's gold, and I do want to preface this by saying that I'm not saying these guys are not going to be good contributors. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have these guys on your team. What I'm saying with fool's gold, these are guys who look so juicy. They're that donut that's on the string that's connected to the stick in front of the horse that you're thinking to yourself, wow, I've made it. I don't think you have. First up, Mark Ingram. Now, we have to remember that this is a guy who was a 3rd string for the Baltimore Ravens last year by the end of the year, and he got cut by the Ravens as a courtesy because they loved and respected him and wanted him to have a chance in the NFL. That is a big point to remember. He is now the RB1 for the Texans. Now, the Texans this year are a little bit of an enigma, mainly because, as we mentioned earlier, we thought that this team was going to be the worst team in the league. And then they just go and just pounce on the Jaguars from the moment the game starts. So, week 1, be careful. Now, Mark Ingram may have looked good in this game. I think he got 80-some yards. He had a decent performance. He wasn't necessarily like the most impressive, but he got a strong workload. He had a strong fantasy performance. The thing that needs to be brought up is how often do you think this year the Texans are going to be blowing teams out and feeding their running backs the ball? How often do you really think that that's going to be happening?
One more time, probably, against the Jags.
One more time.
Other than that, yeah, I don't expect it. I mean, I'm kind of with you. If there's a running back to roster in Houston, it's Mark Ingram, in my opinion. I mean, I get it. David Johnson caught a touchdown pass. Philip Lindsay had a couple carries here and there.
Right.
But Mark Ingram's probably the guy to have on your team. But yeah, much to your point, man, absolutely not. No way. Don't want to have to rely on this guy because 90% of the time they're not going to be ahead. 90% of the time they're going to be losing by a lot and passing a lot.
He is a starter though. So whatever base value you give to your starters, take that, but do not expect a repeat performance of this nature every single week. Second up for Fool's Gold, and I think me and Zach are going to disagree on this one, but I don't know how this is pronounced. Juwan Johnson? Juwan. Okay,
Juwan.
so he
Can't even say my man's name right.
So he had, I believe, 3 targets, but put up a big week because 2 of those 3 targets were for touchdowns. Now, where we probably differ here is that I tend to look at targets and weigh them pretty heavily because I figure the more targets, the more opportunities, right? Those 2 touchdowns probably aren't going to happen every single week. So
Oh, yeah.
you're really
Probably not.
relying, especially in PPR leagues, on getting volume. I think his volume is going to be a little bit low, and I think that his week 1 is more of an anomaly than of the usual.
So I am of the opposite here. I picked up Juwan Johnson in most of my leagues in the offseason. Actually, I had got him last year when he was a rookie, when he had first come out. And it was mostly because I thought he was going to end up as a tight end. But fun fact, he started as a wide receiver in the NFL. I think Juwan Johnson is this year's Robert Tunyon, aka Bobby T. So I think JJ is going to be giving himself an opportunity to score a lot of touchdowns. If you don't have like a top 6 tight end, you know what I mean? Like if you don't have like Waller, Kelsey, Kittle, Pitts,
Pitts with an asterisk
Andrews.
for now. For now.
Yeah, with an asterisk for now, Andrews or any of these guys who are really solid, good players, and you're really kind of relying on like a Hail Mary situation at your tight end, he's not the worst one to roster for a few weeks. He's somebody of whom once Michael Thomas comes back, I might have more questions about it.
Right.
But for now, I think between now and like week 8 to week 10, really solid pickup, probably going to get 6 to 10 touchdowns. I know it's kind of a wide range there, but I fully expect him to be a dominating presence in the end zone because he's huge. He's a massive man going up against these 6-foot corners and these, 5'10" safeties, and he outweighs them by 30 pounds. And he moves like a receiver because he was one. So I gotta disagree with you on this one here.
If you have bench space and you're willing to hold a second tight end, he would be a good pickup. I do agree with that because he does have some pretty big upside as he showed. Again, 2 touchdowns in a game. Like, NFL touchdowns are not free. You have to be a good player to get a touchdown. And if you're getting 2 touchdowns in a game, that means you're of a certain quality. So he's definitely someone to look into.